The Uber driver switched to Arabic on his phone, and I understood every word he said about me. I ordered the Uber from the airport terminal at 11 at night, after my flight from Dubai got delayed by 4 hours. The app said my driver's name was Kareem Hassan, 5-star rating, silver Toyota Corolla. When the car pulled up, I threw my carry-on in the back seat and climbed in front, too tired to care about the usual passenger-driver distance. Kareem looked to be in his late 40s with graying hair at his temples and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd lived through things most people only read about. He greeted me in English with a thick accent and asked if I wanted any specific route to my hotel downtown. I said whatever was fastest because I just wanted to shower and sleep after 16 hours of travel. We pulled away from the terminal and merged onto the highway, and I leaned my head against the window watching the city lights blur past. That's when his phone rang. He answered it on the car's Bluetooth system and immediately switched to Arabic. I kept my eyes on the window and my expression neutral because nobody in America knew I spoke Arabic fluently. Not my colleagues at the consulting firm, not my friends, not even my family. I'd spent 3 years working for a defense contractor in Jordan doing translation work for military intelligence before I got tired of the moral complexity and switched to corporate consulting. The work had required a security clearance and a lot of non-disclosure agreements, and when I left, I decided to leave that whole part of my life behind. I never mentioned my language skills on my resume or in conversation. It was easier to just be another white guy in a suit who'd never lived anywhere interesting. So when Kareem started speaking Arabic to whoever was on the phone, he had no reason to think I'd understand every single word. The conversation started normally enough. The person on the other end asked how his night was going, and Kareem complained about airport traffic and cheap passengers who didn't tip. Then the other voice said something that made my blood run cold. He said in Arabic, "Did you pick up the consultant yet? The one from the Jordan flight?" Kareem responded, "Yes, he's in my car right now. Looks exactly like the photo they sent. Blonde hair, blue eyes, about 30 years old. He's half asleep." I kept my face pressed against the window, but every muscle in my body had gone tense. Someone had sent Kareem my photo. Someone knew I was coming home tonight and had coordinated to make sure he was my driver. The voice on the phone continued, "Good. Take him to the warehouse on Riverside instead of the hotel. We need to ask him some questions about his time in Jordan, about who he worked for and what he knows." My mind was racing, but I forced myself to stay completely still, to keep breathing normally, to give no indication I understood. Kareem said, "What if he resists? What if he realizes we're not going to his hotel?" The voice replied, "He won't realize until it's too late. By the time he figures it out, you'll already be at the warehouse. Mahmoud and his guys will be waiting. They'll handle it from there." Kareem asked, "And after they question him?" There was a pause before the voice said, "That depends on what he knows and whether he's willing to cooperate. If he's smart, he'll tell them everything. If not." The sentence hung unfinished, but the implication was clear. I was being driven to a secondary location where people would be waiting to interrogate me about my work in Jordan, and if I didn't cooperate, I wouldn't be leaving that warehouse alive. I needed to think fast but carefully. If I suddenly asked Kareem to pull over or change destination, he'd know something was wrong. If I tried to jump out of a moving car on the highway, I'd probably get killed. I needed to buy time and figure out who these people were and what they wanted from me. The voice on the phone was still talking, giving Kareem specific directions to the warehouse. He said, "Take exit 9 off the highway, then go left on Industrial Boulevard. The warehouse is the third building on the right, gray metal siding. Flash your headlights twice when you pull up so Mahmoud knows it's you." Kareem confirmed the directions and the call ended. We drove in silence for another minute before Kareem said in English, "So, you have business in the city? You look like a businessman." I forced myself to respond casually, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Yeah, just consulting work. Nothing too exciting." He nodded and turned on the radio to some pop station, probably to fill the awkward silence. I pulled out my phone and opened my text messages, but my hands were shaking slightly. I needed to contact someone, but I couldn't be obvious about it. If Kareem saw me frantically texting, he might realize I knew something was wrong. I opened a message thread with my colleague Michael and typed very slowly, trying to look like someone casually checking their phone. "Flight landed. Weird situation. Might need help. We'll explain later." I hit send and watched the message turn from sending to delivered. Michael wouldn't see it until morning, probably, but at least there'd be some record if I disappeared. I glanced at the GPS on Kareem's dashboard and saw we were still 20 minutes from downtown, but we weren't headed toward my hotel according to the route displayed. We were heading toward the industrial district on the east side. Exit 9 was coming up in 5 miles. I needed a plan. I could call 911, but what would I say? My Uber driver is taking me somewhere I don't want to go? That wouldn't get an immediate response, and by the time police figured out where I was, it might be too late. I could try to convince Kareem to pull over for some reason, then run, but we were on a highway with no sidewalks and nowhere to run to. The best option seemed to be playing along until we got closer to the warehouse, then finding a way to escape before we actually arrived. I casually asked Kareem, "How long have you been driving for Uber?" He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. 3 years now. Good side job. Flexible hours." His English was decent but heavily accented, and he seemed nervous now that the phone call had ended. He kept checking his mirrors more than necessary, and his hands were tight on the steering wheel. We were approaching exit 9 and my window to act was closing. I made a decision. I clutched my stomach and groaned. "Oh man, I don't feel good. I think something I ate on the plane is not sitting right." Kareem looked over at me with concern. You okay? I don't know. My stomach is really hurting. Is there a gas station or somewhere you could pull over for a minute? He hesitated, and I could see him calculating whether this was genuine or a trick. We're almost to your hotel. Maybe 10 more minutes. You can wait? I groaned again, more dramatically this time. I really don't think I can wait. I might throw up in your car. That got him. No Uber driver wants vomit in their vehicle. He sighed and took the next exit, which wasn't exit 9 but exit 7. We pulled off the highway onto a commercial strip with a few gas stations and fast food restaurants, most of them closed at this hour. Kareem pulled into a 24-hour gas station and parked near the entrance. There's bathroom inside. Be quick, please. I have other rides waiting. I grabbed my carry-on from the back seat, which made him frown. You can leave bag. I watch it. No, that's okay. I've got my laptop in here. I'll just take it. I climbed out before he could argue and walked quickly toward the gas station entrance. My legs felt weak and my hands were still shaking, but I forced myself to move with purpose. Inside, the gas station was nearly empty except for a bored-looking clerk behind bulletproof glass. I walked past the bathroom toward the back of the store where there was a rear exit that led to the parking lot behind the building. I pushed through the door and found myself in a dark lot with a few employee cars. I could hear traffic from the highway nearby. I pulled out my phone and opened the Uber app, but my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I canceled Kareem's ride and immediately requested a new one from a different service, Lyft. The app said a driver was 8 minutes away. 8 minutes I needed to stay hidden, and hope Kareem didn't come looking for me. I crouched behind a dumpster in the shadows and tried to control my breathing. My new driver, a woman named Patricia, was showing us 6 minutes away now. I could see the GPS dot moving toward my location. Back in the front parking lot, I heard a car door slam. Kareem had gotten out. I heard him talking on his phone in Arabic again, his voice tense and angry. He was saying, he took his bag and went inside, but he hasn't come back. Something's wrong. He might have figured it out. The voice on the other end responded with words I couldn't quite make out, but Kareem's next statement was clear enough. I'm going to check the bathroom. If he ran, he can't have gone far. 4 minutes until Patricia arrived. I pressed myself further into the shadows behind the dumpster and watched the rear door of the gas station. If Kareem came through that door, I'd have to run and hope I could get to a public area before he caught up with me. The door opened and Kareem stepped out, looking left and right. He had his phone pressed to his ear and was speaking rapidly in Arabic. He's not in the bathroom. The clerk said he went out the back exit. I'm checking now. He walked slowly across the parking lot, his eyes scanning every shadow. I held my breath as he passed within 15 feet of my hiding spot. He was focused on the other side of the lot, looking toward the street. 2 minutes until Patricia arrived. Kareem's phone rang, and he answered it immediately. The voice on the other end was loud enough that I could hear it clearly now. It was angry, demanding to know how Kareem had let me escape. Kareem was trying to explain that I'd seemed genuinely sick, that there was no way he could have known. My Lyft app showed Patricia pulling into the gas station front parking lot. I needed to get to her without Kareem seeing me. I waited until he walked further away toward the street. Then I moved quickly but quietly along the back wall of the building toward the side alley that would take me to the front lot. I could hear Kareem still arguing on the phone behind me. I reached the front parking lot and saw a small red sedan with Lyft stickers in the window. Patricia was a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled into a ponytail. I yanked open the back door and threw myself inside. Drive! Please just drive right now. She turned around with startled eyes. Are you okay? You look terrified. Please, I'll explain, but we need to leave right now. She must have heard the genuine fear in my voice because she put the car in drive and pulled away from the gas station without another question. I looked back and saw Kareem emerging from the side of the building, phone still to his ear, watching us drive away. Patricia drove for a few blocks before pulling into a well-lit parking lot outside a closed shopping center. She turned around in her seat. Okay, what's going on? Should I be calling the police? I took a deep breath and tried to organize my thoughts. My previous Uber driver. Something was wrong. He was taking me somewhere I didn't want to go. I heard him on the phone talking about it. Talking about what? About taking me to a warehouse instead of my hotel. About people waiting there who wanted to question me. Patricia's eyes widened. Question you about what? That was the part I couldn't fully explain without revealing things about my past that were supposed to stay classified. I used to work overseas. I think someone found out and they want information about what I did there. Patricia pulled out her phone. We're calling the police right now. I put my hand on her phone gently. Wait, if we call the police, they'll take a report, maybe investigate, but these people know where I live and work. They coordinated this whole thing. If I make this official, I become a bigger target. So, what do you want to do? Take me to a hotel, not the one I originally booked. Somewhere random where I can figure out my next move. Patricia studied my face for a long moment. You're not a criminal, are you? Not running from the law? No, I promise. I'm just a consultant who used to do translation work in the Middle East. Someone apparently wants to talk to me about that work and they're not interested in asking politely. She nodded slowly. Okay, I know a place. Small hotel near the university. Clean, safe, cheap. We'll go there. We drove in silence for 20 minutes before pulling up to a modest hotel on a quiet street. Patricia refused to accept payment for the ride. You just take care of yourself, and seriously consider calling the police once you're settled. I thanked her and watched her drive away before heading into the hotel lobby. The night clerk was a college-age kid who barely looked up from his phone as I paid cash for a room. I went upstairs and locked the door behind me, then pushed the desk chair against it for extra security. Only then did I allow myself to fully process what had just happened. Someone had tracked my flight from Dubai. Someone had coordinated with an Uber driver to intercept me. Someone wanted to question me about my work in Jordan badly enough to orchestrate a kidnapping. The question was who and why. My work in Jordan had been 3 years ago. I'd been a contract translator working with military intelligence, helping analyze intercepted communications and interview detainees. The work was classified but not particularly exciting. I wasn't some James Bond figure with world-changing secrets. I was just a language specialist who happened to speak fluent Arabic and had a security clearance. But maybe I'd translated something that mattered more than I realized. Maybe some communication I'd worked on had led to an operation that someone wanted revenge for. I opened my laptop and started going through my memories of that time, trying to think of anything that might have made me a target years later. There had been hundreds of translations, thousands of intercepted messages. Most of them were mundane, logistical discussions about supply routes and meeting times, but there had been a few operations that stood out, one in particular. 6 months before I left Jordan, I'd been part of a team analyzing communications from a human trafficking network that was moving people from Syria through Jordan into Europe. We'd identified key players in the network, and our intelligence had led to a major raid that resulted in dozens of arrests and the rescue of over 100 people who'd been held against their will. The network had been run by a man named Youssef al-Rashid, a Jordanian businessman with ties to organized crime across the Middle East. I pulled up news articles from that time and found coverage of the raid. Youssef al-Rashid had been arrested along with 7 of his associates, but the articles from a year ago told a different story. Al-Rashid had been released on a technicality, some procedural error in how evidence was collected. He'd returned to Jordan a free man and had apparently rebuilt his operation. I found a more recent article from 2 months ago. Al-Rashid had been spotted in several American cities, allegedly expanding his trafficking network into North America. Federal authorities were investigating but hadn't been able to build a case yet. My hands went cold as I realized the connection. If Al-Rashid was operating in the States, and if he'd somehow found out I was one of the translators whose work had led to his original arrest, he'd have every reason to want revenge. He'd want to know what else I knew, who else I'd worked with, what other operations I'd been involved in. I needed to contact someone from my old agency, but I'd signed non-disclosure agreements that made that complicated. The work was classified, and I wasn't supposed to discuss it with anyone, even under threat. But if Al-Rashid's people were actively hunting me, I needed protection that only the government could provide. I dug through my old files until I found the emergency contact number I'd been given when I left the agency. It was supposed to be used only for security breaches or threats to former contractors. This qualified. I dialed the number even though it was nearly 2 a.m. A woman answered on the second ring. Verification code. I recited the string of numbers and letters I'd memorized 3 years ago, hoping they were still valid. There was a pause while she checked her system. Code verified. State your name and the nature of your emergency. My name is Daniel Foster. I worked as a contract translator in Jordan from 2019 to 2022. I believe I'm being targeted by someone connected to an operation I worked on. She asked me to hold, and I spent 3 minutes listening to silence before a different voice came on the line. Male, older, with the kind of calm authority that suggested he'd handled situations like this before. Mr. Foster, this is Agent Mitchell with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I'm looking at your file now. You worked on Operation Sandcastle, correct? Yes, among others. But I think this is specifically about Sandcastle, about Youssef al-Rashid. Tell me what happened tonight. I walked him through everything from the Uber driver's phone conversation to my escape at the gas station. He listened without interrupting, and I could hear him typing notes. When I finished, he said, "You did the right thing by calling. Al-Rashid has been on our radar since he entered the country 6 weeks ago. We've been tracking his movements but haven't had enough evidence to act. If he's actively targeting former contractors, that changes things. What kind of protection can you offer? Short term, we can arrange secure housing and surveillance. Long term, it depends on whether you're willing to cooperate with an active investigation. If Al-Rashid is building a trafficking network here, we need to shut it down. Your knowledge of his previous operation could be valuable." I signed NDAS. I can't just start talking about classified operations. The NDAs have exceptions for authorized debriefings and ongoing security threats. If you're willing to work with us, we can make it legal. We'll need you to come in for a full debrief. Go through everything you remember about Sandcastle. Identify any connections that might help us locate Al-Rashid's current operation. I thought about it for approximately 10 seconds. When and where? I'm sending a car to pick you up. Should be there in 40 minutes. Pack light. You won't be returning to that hotel. Where are you taking me? Secure facility outside the city. You'll be safe there while we sort this out. The car arrived exactly 40 minutes later. 2 agents in suits who checked my ID and escorted me to a black SUV with government plates. We drove for an hour into the countryside before turning down an unmarked road that led to a gated facility that looked like a corporate retreat center, but was obviously something more secure. Inside, I was taken to a comfortable room with a bed, desk, and private bathroom. No windows, but not quite a cell either. Agent Mitchell arrived the next morning with coffee and a thick folder. He was in his 50s with gray hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much. "Let's start from the beginning," he said, opening a laptop. "Tell me everything you remember about Operation Sandcastle." For the next 6 hours, I walked through every detail I could remember. The intercepted phone calls, the coded messages, the locations of safe houses where trafficked people had been held. Mitchell took notes and occasionally stopped me to ask clarifying questions or show me photos of people I might recognize. Near the end of the debrief, he pulled up a surveillance photo. "Do you recognize this man?" It was Kareem, my Uber driver from the previous night. That's the driver who tried to take me to the warehouse. His real name is Kareem Al-Naduri. He's Al-Rashid's cousin, been in the States for 5 years. We've been watching him but didn't have enough evidence to arrest him. Until now. Until now? Your testimony about what he said on that phone call gives us probable cause to bring him in for questioning, and his phone records will lead us to the warehouse he was taking you to, which will lead us to other members of Al-Rashid's network. So I'm bait. Mitchell smiled grimly. You're a witness. But yes, your involvement has accelerated our timeline considerably. We were planning to move on Al-Rashid within the month. Now we're moving within the week. Over the next 5 days, I stayed at the secure facility while the DIA built their case. Mitchell kept me updated on developments. They'd arrested Kareem and several other associates. They'd located the warehouse on Riverside and found evidence of human trafficking, financial records that connected to Al-Rashid's previous operation in Jordan. The case was coming together, but Al-Rashid himself remained elusive. He'd gone underground as soon as his cousin was arrested, and they were having trouble locating him. On the 6th day, Mitchell came to my room with a proposal. We want to use you to draw Al-Rashid out. Absolutely not. Hear me out. We'd have full surveillance and tactical teams in place. We'd control every aspect of the situation. But Al-Rashid wants to find you, wants to know what you know. If we let him think he's succeeded, he'll surface and we can grab him. You want me to let myself get kidnapped. We want you to attend a meeting in a controlled environment where Al-Rashid thinks he has the upper hand, but we're actually running the show. You'd be wearing a wire, we'd have agents in the building, and you'd never actually be in danger. I thought about the 100 people who'd been rescued in that Jordan raid. Thought about however many people Al-Rashid was trafficking now. What would I have to do? The plan was elaborate but simple in its core concept. I would return to my normal life, go back to work, act like nothing had happened. The DIA would spread word through their informants that I was back and unprotected. Al-Rashid would make another attempt to grab me, but this time, they'd be ready. 3 days later, I walked into my office building downtown like I'd just returned from a normal business trip. My colleagues welcomed me back and asked about Dubai. I gave vague answers about meetings and jet lag. I went through the motions of normal work, all while knowing that DIA agents were watching my every move from surveillance vans and office building across the street. On the 2nd day back, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was in Arabic. Mr. Foster, we know you understand this language. We know what you did in Jordan. We'd like to discuss this with you in person. Come to the Riverside Cafe tonight at 8. Come alone or people will get hurt. I played the message for Mitchell through a secure line. That's it. That's him making contact. You okay to do this? Do I have a choice? You always have a choice. But if you want to end this threat permanently, this is how we do it. That evening, I walked into the Riverside Cafe at exactly 8. It was a small Mediterranean restaurant in a quiet neighborhood, nearly empty on a Wednesday night. A man in a dark suit sat in a corner booth and gestured for me to join him. Youssef Al-Rashid looked older than his photos, with gray streaking his dark hair and deep lines around his eyes. He smiled as I sat down, but it was the smile of a predator. Mr. Foster, thank you for coming. You didn't give me much choice. There's always a choice. You chose wisely. He signaled the waiter and ordered coffee for both of us in Arabic. Then he switched to English. You cost me 3 years of my life and millions of dollars in business. That operation in Jordan was very damaging to my organization. You were trafficking human beings. You deserved worse than 3 years. His smile disappeared. I don't need your moral judgment. I need information. I need to know who else worked on that operation. I need names of other translators, other analysts, other agents. I need to know what else you learned about my network that wasn't in the official reports. And if I tell you, then you get to keep living your comfortable American life. If you don't, well, you've seen what I'm capable of. I've signed non-disclosure agreements. I can't just give you classified information. He leaned forward. Mr. Foster, do you really think your NDAs will protect you? Do you think your government cares about one translator who left their service years ago? You're expendable to them. But to me, you're valuable. Tell me what I want to know and I'll make sure you're compensated. Refuse and you won't leave this restaurant alive. I glanced around the cafe. I could see at least 3 of Al-Rashid's men positioned at different tables, but I also knew that DIA tactical teams were surrounding the building. Before I tell you anything, I need assurances. I need to know you'll keep your word about letting me live. He smiled again. Of course. I'm a businessman. I keep my agreements. Then I'll tell you everything. But not here. Too public. Your warehouse on Riverside? That's secure, right? We should go there. Al-Rashid studied my face for a long moment, trying to decide if this was a trap. Finally, he nodded. Very well. We'll continue this conversation somewhere more private. But Mr. Foster, if you're playing games with me, you'll regret it. We left the restaurant together, and I climbed into the backseat of his Mercedes with 2 of his men flanking me. As we drove toward the warehouse, I touched the button on my belt buckle that activated my wire and alerted the tactical teams. The next 20 minutes happened very fast. We arrived at the warehouse, and Al-Rashid led me inside to an office space where he clearly felt comfortable and in control. He offered me a seat and began asking detailed questions about Operation Sandcastle. I answered some honestly, stalling for time, waiting for the signal. It came in the form of flashbang grenades exploding simultaneously at 3 different entrances. DIA tactical teams swarmed the warehouse with weapons drawn and voices shouting commands. Al-Rashid tried to run, but was tackled by 2 agents before he made it 10 feet. His men were subdued with similar efficiency. Agent Mitchell appeared at my side. "You okay?" "Define okay. You did good. We got him on attempted kidnapping, witness intimidation, and the trafficking charges are solid. He's going away for a very long time." I watched as they cuffed Al-Rashid and read him his rights. He was screaming in Arabic about lawyers and rights and false arrest, but the wire recording had captured everything, every threat he'd made, every admission about his trafficking network. It was over. The next few months were consumed by depositions and court proceedings. I testified about the kidnapping attempt, about the phone call from Karim, about the meeting at the restaurant. The trafficking charges came with testimony from victims his network had exploited, and the evidence was overwhelming. Al-Rashid was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. Karim and 4 other associates got similar sentences. The DIA offered me a permanent position doing similar translation work, but I declined. I'd had enough of the intelligence world. I went back to corporate consulting and tried to return to normal life, but normal felt different now. I found myself constantly checking for surveillance, always aware of my surroundings, jumping at unexpected phone calls. The therapist the DIA connected me with said I had mild PTSD, and that was normal after what I'd experienced. She taught me coping strategies and helped me process the trauma. A year later, I got a letter forwarded through my attorney. It was from a woman named Aisha who'd been rescued during the Jordan raid. She'd been held by Al-Rashid's network for 8 months, moved from safe house to safe house, forced to work in conditions she described as slavery. She'd eventually been freed and granted asylum in Canada, where she was now rebuilding her life. The letter thanked me for my work on the operation that led to her rescue. She said knowing that someone had cared enough to spend hours translating communications and building the case that freed her meant everything. That the people who'd worked behind the scenes were just as important as the agents who'd raided the houses. She ended by saying she hoped I knew my work mattered and had saved lives. I kept that letter in my desk drawer and read it whenever I wondered if I'd made the right choices. The skills I'd tried to leave behind had ended up saving my life. The work I'd done years ago had mattered enough that someone wanted revenge, and in the end, justice had been served. I still drive for Uber sometimes when I travel, but I'm more careful now. I check the driver's photo against their face. I pay attention to the route, and I never, ever pretend not to understand when people speak languages they think I don't know. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate what other people understand. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is listen carefully when people think you can't hear them. That night with Karim taught me that language is more than just communication. It's survival. It's power. It's the difference between being a victim and being someone who can fight back. And that's something worth remembering whether you're in an Uber or anywhere else in the world. Always pay attention. Always stay alert. And never assume you're safe just because people are speaking a language they think you don't understand. Thanks for hanging out till the end. If you want more crazy stories, make sure to subscribe and leave your take below.